Welcome back to another episode of the Gridiron Guys, and today I'm going to be breaking down my top 10 fantasy running backs for the 2020 season, and for the sake of these rankings, I'm going to say they're in half-point PPR. So let's just get right into it, and we're going to be going from 10 down to 1. And coming in at my 10th running back on this list is Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler finally had that breakout campaign we were all hoping for last year. I mean, he caught 92 passes for 993 yards and 8 touchdowns and had 132 attempts for 557 and 3 touchdowns on the ground. I mean, 224 touches, and that, just those 224 touches, a career high, put him at RB, I believe, 6 or 7 for the year. With the departure of Melvin Gordon now, I really like the upside that Eckler offers if he's able to keep that passing game, which he definitely should, and then add to that rushing game, because I don't think Justin Jackson is really half the player that Melvin Gordon was. I only expect Eckler to build on a strong 2019 campaign. He could be in for some touchdown regression. Scoring 11 touchdowns is a lot for a guy who's not built to be a goal line back, but I think that his receiving stat line of 108 targets and 92 receptions gives him a high 4 as well, because those PPR reception points will really make him a consistent option from week to week. Do I have concern with Eckler taking over bell cow duties? Not really, because he's never been a bell cow back. He's shown he can be super efficient on low touches. I mean, over his last 3 years rushing the ball, he's averaged 5.5 yards per carry, 5.2 yards per carry, and 4.2 yards per carry. Those are all great marks. He's going to do a lot with the touches he can get. And I like Eckler as an RB1, and I'm very comfortable having him as an RB1 on all of my teams. Now, we're going to a guy who's, I think, in for some regression, but may be able to perform at the same high level that he did last year. And that's Aaron Jones. And I have Aaron Jones over Austin Eckler for just what Aaron Jones was able to do last year. And that was putting up a fantastic fantasy season. He scored a total 19 touchdowns and had about 1,600 scrimmage yards. I mean, running for 4.6 yards per carry. Aaron Jones has always been a really efficient runner, a really talented guy, and I think he finished as the RB3 or 2 last year, but I had to knock him down to 9 because the addition of A.J. Dillon makes that backfield very crowded, and who knows, maybe A.J. Dillon doesn't see any playing time this year, but I fear that A.J. Dillon's going to touchdown vulture some of those 16 rushing touchdowns towards the goal line, and just hurt Aaron Jones' stock a little bit as an RB1. But I mean, if a guy like Jamal Williams is traded mid-season or early in the season because they realize they don't need him and they think A.J. Dillon's the future, that immediately boosts Aaron Jones' stock right back up, because Aaron Jones showed he could be so good last year with a very competent backup in Jamal Williams. I just see A.J. Dillon and Jamal Williams cutting into some of those touchdowns. 19 is a mark that's down for some regression, but I really like Aaron Jones as an RB1 too. I have him over Eckler just because he showed us he has RB1 potential, not only as like a tier RB1, but like to be the best running back in the league. I think Aaron Jones offers elite upside more so than Eckler, and he has a little bit lower of a floor just because the crowded backfield and the receiving numbers aren't as good. But I think Aaron Jones is a bit more risky, but I would rather Aaron Jones over Eckler just because he's on a better offense with Aaron Rodgers, showed he can do it last year, and there's just more stuff that's the same for Aaron Jones going into the next season. Now, coming at RB8 was one of my favorite fantasy players last year, helped me do really well in a lot of my leagues, and that is Dalvin Cook. And a lot of you may be thinking, why do you have Dalvin Cook so low? He should be a top 3, maybe even 4 running back, putting up 1,100 yards on the ground last year, 500 yards through the air, catching 53 passes, running for 4.5 yards per carry, 13 total touchdowns. I mean, Dalvin Cook did it all, and that was only in 14 games. But Dalvin Cook is the most polarizing player in the top 10 running backs. That's because he can finish as the RB1 for the year, or he could finish as the RB50 for the year. And that's because he's been banged up throughout his career. In his rookie season, missed 12 games. In 2018, missed 5 games. And even last year, in his breakout campaign, missed 2 games. That's a total of 19 games in 3 years. That's a ton of risk for a high draft pick. But he is so talented, which he's shown us. I mean, he's a league winner if you're able to get him in the back of the early second round, back of the second round. Because if he's healthy for at least 14, 15 games, you're getting a top 5 fantasy player this year. But I had him higher in my rankings, around 4 or 5. But I had to put him further down because now we're having holdout talks for Dalvin Cook for a new contract. And I mean, I don't blame him. He's injury prone. He played great last year. He wants some guaranteed money for his financial stability. But we've seen over the last few years with Melvin Gordon and Le'Veon Bell, these holdouts have to be taken seriously. And with the holdout risk and with the injury risk, I just had to put Dalvin Cook down to 8 all the way from 4 just because that's a lot of risk for a first-round pick. And I'm a firm believer that your first 2 or 3 draft picks, your first, second, and third-round picks, should have minimal risk. Yes, sometimes you have to swing for the fences on a guy that could win you your league, but if one of those picks doesn't hit, it's going to be really hard for you to win your league. And that's why I have Dalvin Cook at 8 and potentially sliding down my rankings more. But you have to monitor that holdout status because if he gets a contract, I'd immediately bump him back up over the next 2 guys in front of him. But the injury risk is still definitely a factor. With Cook, it's not if it's his talent, it's if he's on the field, and that's where you have to make your judgment. And if you have faith in him to be on the field for a large majority of this season, I would recommend picking him in the back of the first round. I'm very comfortable with him as an RB1 if you think he will play 16 games. But moving on to my RB7, I have Josh Jacobs. And I understand some people are going to be, I guess, to say the least, very upset that I have Josh Jacobs over Dalvin Cook, Aaron Jones, and Austin Eckler. But Jacobs is in a perfect scenario. Last year, he was on an abysmal Raiders offense. They did not score points. They had no receiving options other than you can quote-unquote call Darren Waller a rookie. But he put up 4.8 yards per carry, 1150, and 7 touchdowns on a terrible offense. And what I love about Josh Jacobs is he's going to get so many touches next year. There is no competition for any running back in that backfield right now. They're not a pass-first team. They added Henry Ruggs, which will help open up things. But Josh Jacobs, I see him as a 350-touch guy this year, playing full 16. I expect him to beat that 7-touchdown mark from last year. And I think he's extremely safe as a running back. I have no worries about him busting if he gets hurt, which I think he may be a little injury-prone. I'm not sure throughout his career. But I think he's going to be a pretty solid week-to-week option because he's going to be the Raiders' focal point. For some of these guys, they're not the focal point of their offense. Like Austin Eckler, he has to compete with like Mike Williams and Keenan Allen and Hunter Henry. Josh Jacobs is competing with Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow. I mean, Josh Jacobs is the guy in Oakland. John Gruden knows that, and I think it's his year 2 jump, like some of the year jumps that Gurley had under McVay and David Johnson had back in his career. I really like Josh Jacobs this year. I love the consistency. I love the safeness of the pick. And I think as well that he's going to get more integrated in the passing game. Only 20 receptions last year. I expect that to go up. And I think his 252 touches last year is so low. And I think he's going to be a really workhorse back this year. And I think he has top 5 back potential and is almost a top 10 lock for the year. I really like Josh Jacobs as a late first-round pick. And now, moving on to my RB6, I have Joe Mixon. And Joe Mixon has not been getting a lot of top 10 hype. And I see a lot of people hating on Joe Mixon. Oh, he's never broken 1,100 yards rushing. He's always had weapons around him. He can't get it done. He's played with Andy Dalton when Andy Dalton was playing decent. He wasn't that great. Oh, Joe Burrow's not going to help him. I don't buy any of that. I think Mixon is a really talented runner from what I've watched him play. When I've watched him play, he's played on some horrendous offensive lines, and his efficiency is not bad. Last year, the Bengals were terrible offense. He had nothing to work with, no offensive line, no QB. He put up 4.1 yards per carry, and that's not bad. It's not a bad mark at all. 1,100 yards on the ground for playing on a crappy team, always behind, not bad at all. Caught 35 passes last year, not a bad receiving back. I mean, I think Joe Burrow is really going to elevate this offense, and I'm not saying Joe Burrow is going to be a phenomenal QB year one. But let's look what Daniel Jones did for some of the New York Giants fantasy players last year. And as a Giants fan, I'm not saying Daniel Jones is the end-all, be-all savior of the Giants, next Aaron Rodgers, but he was able to move the ball down the field better than Eli Manning was, and we saw how it positively impacted the players around him. You saw Darius Slayton play really well down the stretch. Guys like Caden Smith become kind of fantasy relevant towards the end of the year. Golden Tate played well throughout the season. I mean, the receivers, Saquon was injured, but when Saquon was playing, like that game against Washington at the end of the year, he had like 250 yards. I mean, if Joe Burrow is able to have a Daniel Jones-like season, just move the ball, Joe Mixon's going to have a great fantasy season. They have the return of Jonah Williams after being injured last year. They didn't really do much to fix their offensive line, but I like Jonah Williams. He'll definitely add some stability. Improves QB play will help there. I expect Mixon to catch 50 to 60 passes this year. I mean, he only scored 8 touchdowns last year with 300-plus touches, and I think that's bound to go up. I think his efficiency is going to go up. I'm projecting Mixon for, I would say, around 1,400 yards rushing and 300 yards receiving, 400 yards receiving for around 12 touchdowns. He's always on the field. He's never injured. Giovanni Bernard is a non-factor. I really like Mixon this year, and I think he could finish the RB1 for the season. He's a sneaky pick for that because I think Joe Burrow and that offense has really high potential that is just getting slept on right now despite the difficult division. But now we're going into our elite tier of running backs. My top 5 RBs are kind of, I put them in a top 1 tier, and 6 through 10, Mixon, Jacobs, Cook, and Jones and Eckler, I put in my tier 2, which we're going to get into tier rankings in a few weeks. But my RB5, the back end of my tier 1, is Alvin Kamara. And last year, I drafted Kamara. I thought with no Mark Ingram, he is bound for stardom. He's going to explode onto the scene this year with a phenomenal year. And he disappointed. I'm not going to lie. He finishes RB 13, I think, or 15. And he just wasn't that good. His touchdown numbers dropped from 13 and 18 the 2 years prior down to 6. He played 14 games. He was banged up throughout the year, which may have hurt him in some ways. His yards per attempt was still 4.7, but I mean, he's a 250 touch guy, and we saw that last year again. Without Mark Ingram, he's not going to get more than 250 touches. But I mean, the thing that separated Kamara always is he's an elite scoring option on the best offense, one of the best offenses in the league. I mean, the Saints are going to be another offensive juggernaut this year. And I think when it comes to Kamara, I just think he'll be in better health this year, banged up last year. And I expect him to return to those 13, 15 touchdown seasons instead of 6. Because if you look at his yards last year, he had around 1,300 total scrimmage yards. The 2 years prior were 1,500 each. Those are essentially the same numbers, and he played 2 less games. He's caught in 81 passes in the 3 seasons he's played, like 81 in each season, which is phenomenal for half PPR. He's really efficient. I just think it comes down to his touchdowns are going to go back up, and I expect them to do so. And if they do, he's a top 5 running back. Putting up 1,500 scrimmage yards and 15 touchdowns is phenomenal. And I just think Kamara's going to do it this year. Latavius Murray does not scare me. He played well in some games, but he does not affect Kamara. Kamara is a 250 touch guy, as I said, and you don't have to worry about Murray eating into his workload. Sean Payton has showed that he will get the same amount of touches every single year, regardless of who's playing with him. And his versatility as a receiver out of the slot is also something that the Saints can utilize with Murray at the same time. I love Kamara. He's a bounce-back player. I know people may be skeptical because he burned them last year, but despite being a Kamara owner last year, I'm perfectly okay with spending a first-round pick on Kamara this year. Now at RB4, we have Derrick Henry. And Derrick Henry finally exploded as that monster back we all expected him to be. He had a pretty good 2018 season, but the 2019 season is the beast that Derrick Henry can be going forward. And that was unlocked by Ryan Tannehill, because Derrick Henry was finally not the focal point of the offense. He may have been the player that the other teams were trying to stop, but Ryan Tannehill gave a passing attack that had to be considered when they were game planning against the Titans. Tannehill played great last year, and as Tannehill played great, Henry had better running lanes, just going off. I mean, Tannehill was the key to Henry's success, and I expect the Titans to have another great offense this year. I expect Tannehill to play really well once again, which means I think Derrick Henry will have the efficiency and per-game stats that he had under Tannehill for the entire year. I mean, listen to these numbers. 303 attempts on the ground, 1,540 rushing yards, 16 touchdowns. I mean, that's just absurd numbers right there. 18 receptions for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, I think Derrick Henry's going to be another 300 touch back. He's shown throughout his career that he can stay healthy and that he's a beast. Like, he's not going to get injured. If anything, he only speeds up as the year goes on. I love Derrick Henry this year, just basically because Tannehill is there, and I expect the offense to be really, really good. They may have lost Jack Conklin, but they replaced him with Isaiah Wilson, a mauling run blocker who I loved. I mocked him to the Titans. I think it's a great fit. And I just expect Derrick Henry to pick up where he left off last year and continue his dominant 2020 campaign in 2021. Now we're getting into our top 3, and these are the guys that are, I have the same rankings as most people for the top 3 running backs, but I would like to acknowledge a few points about them. And at RB3, I have Ezekiel Elliott. And as a Giants fan, I am not trying bias here, but Ezekiel Elliott, he's a great back. You may disagree with some of his off-the-field antics, but he's a great back. He's consistently a 300 to 350 touch guy. His career efficiency is around high 4s. He scores a bunch of touchdowns. And every single year, Zeke is a great fantasy player. Last year, I feel like he did not get enough hype as he deserves, putting up 1,700 total yards and 14 touchdowns. That's a great season. As Dak Prescott has continued to emerge as a high-level starter, I mean, I think Zeke his touchdowns and efficiency have gone up only with that. And there may be some people skeptical about the Dallas switching to a pass-first offense, but I would not worry. I think that no matter what, Zeke is always the guy for them, and if anything, the addition of CeeDee Lamb and the emergence of Michael Gallup will only help open the box for him, as he won't have to play stack boxes. They did lose some pieces on the offensive line, but I still project them to have a strong offensive line, and I project Zeke to do exactly what he's been doing. I think he could finish the year as an RB1. I think this might be his best season because of the focus other opposing defenses are going to have to put on the passing game. Not to mention, the NFC East defenses are pretty weak, and I expect Zeke to feast against Giants, Redskins, and Eagles this year. I mean, Zeke has RB1 potential, but I have him at RB3 because the 2 guys ahead of him have such high upside. And coming in at RB2 is Saquon Barkley. And Saquon, I think, is the most talented back in the league. From a physical standpoint, the dude's a freak. He can run through you. He can catch the ball one-handed. He can juke you out of your shoes, or he can just run you straight over. And I think this year, the Giants' offense is poised to take another step forward. Last year, it showed some improvement, year 1 under Daniel Jones. But I think this year, with the addition of Andrew Thomas, being able to slide Nate Solder to the right side, getting some more offensive line depth, and now having a decent receiving core in Darius Slayton, Sterling Shepard, Golden Tate, and Evan Ingram, if they're able to stay healthy, opposing defenses are going to have to defend. They're not going to be able to load the box against Saquon. And I think Saquon was really banged up last year. Not his best season, but I think I expect him to return to his rookie season where he put up 2K scrimmage yards and 15 total touchdowns. I think that's very in the realm of possibilities for Saquon, considering he did that under a worse offensive line, a terrible coach in Pat Shurmur, and an aging, past his prime Eli Manning. I think Saquon can build on those 2018 numbers and put up 2K plus scrimmage yards this year and close to 20 touchdowns. I know people might be concerned with the injury, new coach. Is Daniel Jones the guy at the offensive line? But this guy, no matter how bad his team is around him, he's going to put up numbers. I mean, last year, he had a down year. And he put up 1,500 total yards and 8 touchdowns. He's just such a safe pick. His receiving stats are so underrated as well, catching 91 passes in his rookie year and 52 last year. I mean, Saquon is just a guy. I think he can have a McCaffrey-like season next year. And I just expect him to dominate on a weekly basis, especially with a better offense and offensive line to help him this year. And lastly, our RB1, Mr. Fantasy Football himself, Christian McCaffrey. And he put up an unreal season last year. About 2,400 scrimmage yards, 19 touchdowns, and 116 receptions. Those numbers are absurd. And now he's getting Teddy Bridgewater and a new coach to rejuvenate that offense that was pretty abysmal last year outside of McCaffrey. Bridgewater is a great fit with McCaffrey, will help on all the checkdowns. And I think now that they have a better receiving core with Robbie Anderson, Curtis Samuel, and the emergence of DJ Moore, I expect them to be a better balanced offense. And will McCaffrey get 400 touches again? Maybe not. But getting 142 targets, 124 targets the year prior, and 113 in 2017 just shows that even if his rushing numbers are down, he's going to be a great back because he's catching 100 passes, and he's going to be scoring touchdowns. Even when he's not, he's putting up a crazy amount of scrimmage yards. He's never missed a career game, which is why I have him over Saquon. I think both are identical in their talent and their situation. But I just like McCaffrey a little bit more because he showed he's consistent. He'll be consistently on the field. But I mean, if you have the first pick, you're taking McCaffrey. Can you justify Saquon? Yes, you can. If you really think that Saquon is a better talent from a physical standpoint and you think he's going to put up a McCaffrey year like last year, you can take Saquon over McCaffrey. But I would say those two guys are the only guys you consider for the first two pick. I mean, I take McCaffrey at 1. Coming from a Giants fan, take McCaffrey. Just unreal receiving back. That beginning of last year was absolutely crazy. And there's not much more to say than this. He's only getting better. He's only 24 years old. He just got a much better quarterback than he's ever played with. Bridgewater is extremely accurate. Loves throwing it short, and I just think he's going to excel once again. I think his last year's stat line is not out of the box for this year as well. And I think he's poised to dominate once again in fantasy football. And that concludes my top 10 running back list. Make sure to like and subscribe and let me know what you think about my list down below in the comment section. And this list will be changing throughout the next coming month or two as news around Dalvin Cook emerges, as guys like Raheem Mostert may get traded to new situations. I'll have to cover that in a video. But a lot of those little changes will be on our IG. So make sure to follow us at gridiron_guys_YT on Insta for our updated rankings and analysis via our Instagram posts. And that concludes the video. Just make sure to stay tuned for wide receiver, tight end, and QB top 10 rankings throughout the next few days or weeks.